Oh, right, okay, here we go. Yeah, Steve's an American public interest attorney, executive director of the Alliance for Biointegrity. He came to prominence by initiating a lawsuit against the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, all of which is well documented. I should say it's a great story. This book is a really good read. It's a real page-turner. And it's kind of like a novel. You can't wait to get to the next episode. And so all of this stuff that I'm telling you now very in a compressed way is explained more fully and in a fascinating way in the book. Yeah, so he actually brought a lawsuit against the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, gained worldwide attention by exposing how the agency had enabled the commercialization of GM foods by covering up the extensive warnings of its own scientists. And again, he documents that as well. And those scientists who discovered the risks and the Food and Drug Administration was lying about the facts and actually violating federal food safety laws. So, I mean, all right, there's a lot of skullduggery involved in suppressing knowledge about genetically modified foods. And this, I think, needs to be overcome. Okay, so Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. It's great having somebody in the Department of the History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge as one of the reviewers and getting his very astute comments. And I was blessed really to have many scientists and experts on science or different angles of inquiry that were all very important to the book, reading the chapters, commenting, and making sure that it was as accurate as possible, because that is the goal. Obviously, when one writes a book entitled Altered Genes, Twisted Truth, How the Venture to Genetically Engineer Our Food has subverted science, corrupted government, and systematically deceived the public, one does not want to add to the confusion. One wants to clear the air, as Richard says he thinks the book can be, and therefore it was very important for me and for the members of the review team to make sure that the book was as accurate as possible. So we're here today to announce a birth and to declare a death. We're announcing the birth of a new book, and through it, the birth of a new wave of awareness about the unusual and unacceptable risks of genetically modified foods. And we are declaring the death of the massive enterprise that's producing them. Now, I realize that it may seem premature and more than a little rash to declare the death of this mammoth enterprise at a time when the mainstream media in North America, the United Kingdom, and many other parts of the world are routinely reporting that their safety has been established through solid scientific testing and that there's essentially no debate within the scientific community about their safety and their desirability. And the declaration may seem additionally outlandish in light of the fact that the UK and some other EU countries are now seriously considering removing long-standing restrictions against the commercial planting of GM crops, which would significantly expand the number of nations in which they are cultivated. But when the facts are fully considered, the declaration appears quite reasonable indeed. And that's because, as the book demonstrates, the mammoth venture to reconfigure the genetic core of the world's food supply is not based on sound science, as its proponents would have us believe, but instead is based on the systematic subversion of science, and not on the facts, but on the comprehensive distortion of the facts. Consequently, this venture would collapse if subjected to an open airing of the truth. It would collapse, and it will inevitably collapse, because it is founded upon falsehood. It is founded upon falsehood, and that is systematically and thoroughly documented in my book. And when you have a massive enterprise that is purporting to be the new wave in agriculture and has been subjecting tens of millions of people around the world for over 15 years, actually close to 20 years now, to untested and novel food products. If it is founded on fraud, even if it's to some significant degree based on fraud, it will collapse. But this is founded essentially and chronically and crucially on fraud. And that's why when the air is cleared, there isn't going to, I think, even be a need for new testing. There's going to be a huge demand for this venture to be ended, and it will implode. And that is why there has been such incessant suppression of the facts. That is why when research is done that in any way casts doubt on the safety of these crops, not only is the research disparaged, but the researchers are viciously attacked. They lose their jobs, or they're denied tenure if they don't get fired, or if they don't have a job, they're not going to get one, or they lose their funding, or all of the above. And again, this has happened repeatedly, and I should say sickeningly. It is disgusting what has been done in the name of science by individuals and organizations that have abused their positions of authority. Because we're not just talking about a few hacks or quacks that have been complicit in this disinformation and in the fraud. We are talking about well-credentialed scientists at eminent universities, many of whom hold positions of great respect and authority within the scientific community. And we are talking about institutions such as the United States National Academy of Science, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Medical Association, and closer to home here in the UK, the Royal Society, the world's oldest and in many ways most august scientific body, which has sullied itself in its eagerness to promote genetically engineered food and convince the world that they are safe. And in doing so, it has departed from its age-old tradition of not getting involved in partisan issues, not taking a partisan stand. Not only has it proactively intervened, as it itself has acknowledged, it has added to the disinformation. And it's really a scandal what has happened. And that must stop. And that's why I am issuing today a challenge to the Royal Society, really kind of as an exemplar of what is wrong and what needs to be done, to first acknowledge the many misrepresentations it has made, or statements that, if not outright misrepresentative, have clearly confused people. And it's hard to believe that they were innocent and that they did not have the aim of confusing people. To acknowledge also the unfair attacks it has made, primarily against the research that Richard Jennings referred to, the research conducted at the Rowett Institute in the 90s under the direction of Arpad Pushtai. Solid research. In fact, that research was so solid, it won out, that design won out over 30 submissions from around the world for test protocol that could be a rigorous protocol for testing genetically engineered foods to determine if they're safe. And it won. It was funded by the Scottish government. A lot of taxpayer money went into that study. And when it did what it was supposed to do, which was to rigorously test a genetically engineered food, in this case genetically engineered potatoes, the results were very unsettling. They were unsettling to the poor rats that were consigned to dine on those potatoes, and they were unsettling to Dr. Pushtai and his team, and surprising to him, because he did not expect to find problems. He was not some activist trying to show that these foods were dangerous. He fully expected that there would be no problem, but there were problems, plenty of them. statistically significant problems. And the Royal Society was at the forefront of the attacks against Dr. Pushtai and his research. And they should be ashamed of themselves for having done so. And the least they can do to help repair the damage is to admit the facts that his research was accepted for publication in The Lancet, one of the premier scientific journals in the world, based on its merits, and that it has never been refuted. It couldn't be refuted. The government confiscated all of the potatoes and destroyed them all. And without those potatoes, you can't refute it. The only way to have tried to replicate it was to use those potatoes, because every insertion of a cassette of DNA that's inserted through genetic engineering is a unique event with its own unique set of side effects. And the only way to replicate the study, to test it, to either confirm or refute it, is to use the exact same genetic event, the insertion event. And those two unique insertion events, because there were two different lines of genetically engineered potatoes, were destroyed by a government that did not want to follow up and find out what was happening. And that's another trend. When research has returned unsettling results, governments have destroyed the evidence. This has happened more than once. So this claim by the proponents, they really want science, and that those of us who are concerned or against science, it's baloney. They do not want the science to go forward. They've done whatever they could to suppress it and only let things out that they approve of, and only let opinions be voiced that they approve of. And people who voice contrary ones have paid the price, often heavily. Science must be restored. As one of the eminent scientists who was on my review team, the biologist Philip Riegel, has noted in his endorsement of my book, the book demonstrates that what's at stake is not merely the future of our food and the safety of our food, it's the future of science itself. Because as my book demonstrates, the proponents of genetic engineering are right in one respect. Since the introduction of genetic engineering, and especially since its application in developing new varieties of food, science has come under serious attack. But the attack has come from within. The attack on science has been mounted by the scientific community. They have subverted the standards that they were trained to uphold. They have besmirched their own integrity as scientists, and this has to become known, and there has to be a turnaround. It's imperative, and that's why I've challenged the Royal Society. I plan to deliver them a book and the challenge. All of you will be emailed a copy of that challenge, and I hope it's widely distributed. And as the challenge points out, they cannot legitimately ignore this book. Either the book is true, and the facts it cites are actual facts, or it's not. But as Richard has mentioned, there really are two different worlds. But the world of the proponents, in which the proponents of genetically engineered foods dwell, is a fantasy land in which there's an overwhelming scientific consensus these foods are safe. That's bunk. There has never been a scientific consensus, and there's a very, very vigorous debate within the scientific community today about the safety of these foods. It's a fantasy world in which these foods have been rigorously tested and confirmed safe. That's more bunk. Not a single one of these foods has been demonstrated safe through rigorous testing worthy of the name, and several of them have failed the testing, and problems have cropped up. There are many other ways in which it's a fantasy world. But if the facts in my book are solid, if what my book says is solid, then the genetic engineering venture must stop. It must be stopped. And that's why It's important that the Royal Society and other proponents of genetically engineered food read my book, deal with it. I've challenged them, the Royal Society, to itemize a list of every inaccurate statement of fact that they see in it and explain why it's inaccurate and cite the evidence that corroborates their assertion. And I'm talking not about my conclusions based on fact, but just facts that can be easily verified or falsified based on evidence that's out there, not judgment calls. And I've also told them that they should document any instance where the logic is flawed. And if they can't do that by April 20th, or by April 20th, they make the submission, and then the world can judge whether my book is solid or whether they live in a fantasy world. Because if my book is solid, it's clear they and the other proponents are in a fantasy world and are trying to keep all of us into living in a fantasy world where we're confused about the facts and ready to accept these crops that never should have come to market in the first place, only came to market based on the fraud of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and have only continued to survive by the incessant misrepresentations and spin doctoring of a whole range of scientists. So that is where we are today. That is the challenge. The challenge to the other side is back up your statements or admit the truth, and let's get on with the scientific enterprise, and let's move on to putting our resources into forms of agriculture that we know are safe, sustainable, and sensible. Thank you very much.